You're listening to a CNA podcast. Indonesia's capital city, Jakarta, is in trouble. It's literally sinking by about 1 to 15 centimeters every year. It's also congested, really polluted, not to mention prone to earthquakes. So it's out with the old, in with the Nusantara. That's the name of the country's new capital city, built from scratch.
Kepindahan ibu kota negara ke Nusantara.
President Joko Widodo posted that back in March on his Instagram account, and he says the move to East Kalimantan is not just a physical shift, but a philosophical one too. The Nusantara capital city is set to open exactly 1 month from today, but critics have not grown quiet. I'm Teresa Tang. CNA's Jakarta correspondent Saifulbahri Ismail, along with senior producer Lewa Pardomuan, join me to talk about the promises and the pitfalls of this new capital city. Gentlemen, welcome to the show.
Hi, Teresa.
Hi, Teresa.
Saiful, I've actually been to Jakarta one time. It was years ago, and what stood out to me the most was the traffic. You, though, you've been based in the city for several years now. Can you describe what it's like for those who haven't been?
Well, Teresa, you're right about the traffic in Jakarta. It can get frustrating sometimes, especially when you're in a car and you're late for an appointment, right? That's why my main mode of transportation in Jakarta is the motorcycle taxi. That's the best way to beat the traffic and get to your appointments on time. Of course, I know motorcycle taxis are not available in Singapore for safety reasons, but you should try it the next time you're in Jakarta. It's cheap, fast, and convenient. Now, traffic congestion is not the only problem in Jakarta. The city has been plagued with, for many years, with problems such as floods, inaccessibility to clean water, inadequate housing, poor waste management, and pollution, and the list goes on. These problems are part of the reasons why Indonesia wants to move its capital to Nusantara in East Kalimantan. Those who support the move will say that relocating the capital city will ease the burden on Jakarta, but those who are against the move will say that the argument does not make sense. Moving the capital to East Kalimantan will not solve Jakarta's problems. They believe that all of the problems I mentioned earlier will still exist in Jakarta.
Lewa, you're Indonesian. For people who don't know you, one adjective I'd use to describe you is patriotic, right? You love your country. We all know that. You're incredibly passionate about telling its stories. And I'm curious, when this mega project was announced back in 2019, what went through your mind?
I'm flattered by your description, Teresa. Thank you for that. Of course, Nusantara is one of the country's most ambitious development projects in Indonesian history. I think when the project was first announced, the reaction from many people just like, wow, is it going to happen? But to put things into context, this is not the first time that Indonesia wants to move the capital to another place. Back in 1950s, first President Sukarno initiated the construction of Palangkaraya in central Kalimantan province. But then the project was shelved after he was ousted in the 1960s. So I think most Indonesians are quite excited about Nusantara. The site where President Joko Widodo kickstarted the project has attracted visitors from around the archipelago, including Jakarta itself, which is about 1,200 kilometers away. The fun part is that there's a bit of confusion sometimes. When I went filming for the story, I went to north part of Jakarta, a slum area. I spoke to one lady and she said, I think one of Jakarta's main landmarks, which is the National Monument built by Sukarno, will also be moved to Nusantara. So it shows us there's still kind of confusing among some people.
Yeah, what's exactly moving, what's staying? Okay, so Nusantara broke ground back in 2022, and it's actually not going to be completed until 2045. That's more than 2 decades from now. You've both visited the site of this mega project, and I want to talk about that. Saiful, what did you see? What did you think?
Teresa, I had the opportunity to visit Nusantara capital city site twice. The first time was in November 2022. The first thing that struck me when I was there was the distance between the site and civilization. The site is in the middle of the forest, and one of the entry points to Nusantara is the city of Balikpapan. Now, from Balikpapan, it's a 2-hour drive to reach Nusantara. When I reached the site, I was greeted by swathes of tall eucalyptus trees. Now you can imagine how many thousands of hectares of those trees need to be cleared to make way for the capital city. There were also many bulldozers, excavators, cement mixers and cranes moving around like columns of ants clearing the land to prepare for the actual construction of the capital city. The only buildings being built then were towers for the construction workers. Developers had to build the living quarters first, right? For the thousands of workers who will be working day and night at the construction site. Now, the second time I visited Nusantara capital city site was in November 2023, and what a difference a year has made. What was previously just barren land, a year later, structures of buildings have risen up. Now, most of the construction work is focused in the central government district. That includes the presidential palace, the plaza where the ceremony to celebrate the country's 79th Independence Day will be held. Now, the presidential palace is shaped like the mythical bird Garuda, and it's the centerpiece of Nusantara. The Nusantara Authority is also ramping up construction of key government buildings and residential towers for public service officers. Jokowi frequently visits the site to monitor Nusantara's progress, and he has said that he will start working in his new office in Nusantara in July. That's this month, right? Jokowi said he will only relocate his office once the basic infrastructure such as water and electricity are ready. Now, the Public Works and Housing Minister Basuki Hadi Mulyono said these basic infrastructure will be ready in July. Now, what will be interesting to see is how Jokowi will be working in his office in Nusantara when almost all activities are still in Jakarta. Now, will Jokowi need to commute to Jakarta every day? These are questions which will be answered soon. But what is certain is that President Joko Widodo is convinced that plans to hold the 79th Independence Day in Nusantara are on track.
The preparation for 17th August is almost complete. There are no problems on the ground. Earlier, we checked the location of the venue one by one, then the sequence of the ceremony. There are no problems. The construction will be ready around mid-July and preparations for 17th August will begin.
So, former chairman of the Nusantara Capital Authority, Bambang Susantono, was also upbeat when I interviewed him on the site last year. Let's have a listen.
We do hope that by 17th of August 2024, we're going to have some sort of like an ecosystem that consisting of the palace. You can see the palace right there, and then a couple of ministerial offices. Not only that one, not only offices for the government, but also what we call the amenities or the facilities for those who would like to move here as the pioneer. And it's not big, but it's enough for ecosystem to show that yes, this is the first step of the next step that we are going to undertake.
Saiful, this project has been the focus of criticism right from the start. Frankly, we do not have time to go through the list of all the challenges that it's faced. But just to name a few, there have been allegations of corruption, of local communities being forcibly displaced, negative environmental impacts, and even the name Nusantara itself was an issue because people said it wasn't inclusive. It was too Java-centric. Saiful, why has this city been such a lightning rod for controversy?
Well, Teresa, one of the reasons for these controversies could be because from the beginning, there wasn't enough buy-in from people who are either directly or indirectly affected by the project. For example, to ensure that the project is legal, right? It was made into law and bulldozed in Parliament without much consultation. There were also too many expectations to get the project done on time. The first phase of the city is expected to be completed in just 2 years. This urgency is perhaps born of anxiety because the project was unable to attract foreign investments. Another big stumbling block is the problem of land conflicts or overlapping claims in the areas which have been designated for the Nusantara development. There are still people living on the parcels of land which are part of the Nusantara development. The challenge is always trying to find a compensation amount that can be agreed between the authorities and residents. There are also cases of illegal residents, and the Nusantara Authority has served eviction notices to them. Now, some of these residents have said that they are not illegal, and what the authority is doing is a violation of local and indigenous community rights. Now, last month, the project hit a new low when the Nusantara Capital City Authority head Bambang Susantono and his deputy, Doni Rahajo, took Indonesia by surprise with their sudden resignations. But the problems surrounding the project surfaced in public much earlier, because in April, Bambang told Parliament that both Doni and him had received their salaries 11 months late. Now, the delay was because of a presidential regulation on their salaries that was only issued in January this year. Now, the delay in salary payments may just be the tip of the iceberg, something which the public is aware of. But there may be other issues which Bambang and Doni did not speak about publicly, right? Which is the bottom of the iceberg. Observers believe that one of the reasons why both men left was because the targets set by the government were often unrealistic. On the other hand, the government believes that the authority has underperformed in handling various issues related to the project, including land acquisition. Now, Coordinating Maritime Affairs and Investment Minister Luhut Panjaitan had openly criticized Bambang and Doni, saying that the problems of Nusantara's development lay with their leadership. Now, Luhut said that they were unwilling to make decisions even though the authority had been equipped with much power.
Just picking up on that, Saiful has explained very clearly. So I also talked to some sources on this one. So there are two scenarios. Bambang resigned because basically he could not meet the deadlines, because land acquisitions in Indonesia is a very complex matter. You're dealing with private ownership, ancestral land, land owned by villages, and so on. So it's politics. And another scenario is that, he resigned because he felt that I could not achieve those targets. And what Saiful said about 11 months, I also heard from other sources that he was not paid for 11 months because the finance ministry could not find, basically, cannot justify that. So it's, for me to say, it's quite messy, actually. The whole project is quite messy, if I'm allowed to say that.
Lewa, you got to know very intimately how some indigenous populations feel about this new capital. And some of them, in your recent documentary, they say they were totally caught off guard, that they feel like they'll have no place in Nusantara, even going so far as to say they don't want to become slaves to the newcomers. Tell us about them.
So foundations of Nusantara are laid in the backyard. So I spoke to some villagers there. So they were quite alarmed by the presence of boundary makers next to their houses. They woke up in the morning and they say, oh, what is this exactly? So they're worried about their location. What are they going to do? Compensation is one key aspect that actually looks like that is not resolved until now. So most villagers are farmers, growing vegetables, rice, and rubber. When I was there, they talk about their lack of education because many don't even finish elementary school. So Nusantara will attract migrants, other Indonesians from other parts of the country, including civil servants. They worry that we can't compete with them because basically we are not equipped to be part of Nusantara.
Let's focus on the money, Lewa. The project has been hampered by a lack of foreign investment. You know, initially, Mr. Widodo said only 20% of the $30 billion needed would be covered by the government. But that number has ballooned. Investors have been pulling out. What is scaring them off? And, you know, if investors are running in the other direction, where's the money going to come from?
I've spoken to a few sources again, and also a former minister said in an off-the-record gathering here in Singapore that Nusantara won't be ready for occupancy in August. Technically, it's not ready. And Saiful has mentioned that earlier. There are no foreign investors yet. No MOUs have been signed whatsoever.
Not a single one.
No. So basically, from that conversation, the conclusion is that President Joko Widodo has given conflicting signals when he presented Nusantara to potential investors. Truth is, they are struggling to attract foreign investors. And also, there's one nagging question. Jokowi's successor, Prabowo Subianto, will he follow through the project or not? If I remember correctly, and Saiful can correct me if I'm wrong, yes, Prabowo has never declared officially, we will continue this Nusantara project. And Prabowo has promised free meals to students. So if Nusantara and the meal projects are carried out simultaneously, it will drain the state budget. So there are also worries about economic stability. I spoke to Dr. Siwage Dharmanegara, his senior fellow and coordinator for Indonesian Studies program at Institute of Ishak. Let's have a listen.
The poor track record is always haunting investor before they come to Indonesia. But this is actually, maybe if Indonesia wants to start again, this is the opportunity for Indonesia to showcase that Indonesia is serious about implementing the environmental protection regulation, the enforcement of the sustainability development. I think government needs to put serious attention to enforce the environmental regulation.
Now, Lewa mentioned Prabowo, so let's talk about that, Saiful. Nusantara has been described as Joko Widodo's legacy project, and a lot of its success is really going to depend on that incoming president, on Prabowo Subianto. But just last month, Prabowo, he penned an op-ed piece and he detailed his manifesto as president, and he didn't even mention Nusantara. That's got to raise alarm bells. What does that omission tell us about his intention to pursue it?
Well, Teresa, construction will continue. There is no turning back on Nusantara, actually. Structures such as the presidential palace have already been built, and it's unlikely that anyone, not any incoming president, is going to dismantle them, right? The development of Nusantara is protected also by law that prevents the next president from ditching the project. So Prabowo's administration, as the incoming government, will have no choice but to continue the development of Nusantara. But the question is, at what pace? Now, during the presidential election campaign, Prabowo had on numerous occasions pledged his commitment to continue Nusantara's development. But fast forward to today, we hardly hear Prabowo talk about Nusantara. People close to Prabowo have also voiced publicly their reservations on the project. For example, Prabowo's economic advisor, Sudrajat Jiwandono, has said he prefers the president-elect's free meal program over the Nusantara capital city project. Sudrajat, who is also Prabowo's brother-in-law, said the free meal program had clearer budget planning and it's something that can be implemented immediately. He said the Nusantara project lacked the careful cost calculations, especially concerning the lack of support from the state budget. Sudrajat questioned if Indonesia wants to keep borrowing money and build a new capital with debt. Now, what is also surprising is this. In April, Public Works and Housing Minister Basuki Hadimulyono said Prabowo and Gibran had been set to be sworn into office in Nusantara. This is because the 1945 Constitution requires the president to be inaugurated in the country's capital. However, earlier in July this month, it was revealed that Prabowo and Gibran are to be sworn in at the Senayan Legislative Complex in Jakarta, rather than in the Nusantara capital city on 20th October as previously announced. Now, this sudden U-turn in the decision of where to hold the inauguration of the president and vice president certainly raised eyebrows. Now, if the inauguration of the president is going to be held in Jakarta, then perhaps it's a hint that Jakarta will continue to be the capital at least until after 20th October. Also, it's useful to note that the inauguration of the president and vice president is usually held in the House of Representatives, and the parliament building in Nusantara will only begin construction next year in 2025. So perhaps the inauguration ceremony cannot be done in Nusantara because the legislative complex will not be ready yet.
Yeah, that would be a problem.
So if I may pick up on that too, Teresa, so what I heard also from Prabowo sources there, they have not decided yet whether Prabowo will be there in Nusantara or not. But there's another scenario. Gibran might be working in Nusantara. But still, everything is up in the air because we've got to basically, everything, something like depends on the inauguration in October and then see what happens after that when it comes to Nusantara.
So one takeaway I have so far is that Nusantara is very far away. We know it sits on an old timber plantation, and I think, Lewa, you mentioned more than 1,000 kilometers away from Jakarta. It's on an Indonesian portion of the island of Borneo. So, Saiful, what's going to happen to Jakarta once Indonesia officially moves its capital, whenever that may be? What does it mean when the seat of political power and the center of wealth are separated?
Well, Teresa, recently, to be precise, on the 22nd of June, Jakarta celebrated its 497th birthday. Yeah, probably it's the last as the capital of Indonesia. Jakarta will officially lose its standing as the capital of Indonesia when the presidential decree on Nusantara capital city is signed. Now, President Joko Widodo has said that he could be the one signing the decree, or later the President-elect Prabowo Subianto of the new government could also sign it. As a sign of this transition, the Indonesian government will conduct this year's Independence Day ceremony in two locations, in Jakarta and Nusantara. Jokowi and Prabowo will be attending the ceremony in Nusantara, and Vice President Ma'ruf Amin and Vice President-elect Gibran Rakabuming Raka will attend the ceremony in Jakarta. Earlier in March this year, lawmakers designated special status for Jakarta to provide a legal framework for the city's position after Nusantara becomes the country's capital. Now, under that framework, Jakarta will remain as the country's economic hub and a global city. Now, what do you mean by a global city? It's a center of trade, services, finance, and business. Now, the question is, will relocating the country's capital to East Kalimantan help to solve Jakarta's many problems, like I mentioned earlier during the program, right? Now, the initial argument is that moving the capital will ease the burden on Jakarta. But this may not necessarily be true, because the opposite may just happen. Making Jakarta a global city may in fact increase the burden. For example, as a global city and an economic hub, Jakarta will surely attract more people to work and live there, right? And this may not solve the issue of overpopulation in the city. When there is overpopulation, it will then stress the city's infrastructure, worsening the problems of traffic congestion and pollution. Now, Jakarta's journey to become a global city will also not be easy. The local government said it needs 600 trillion rupiah, or nearly 37 billion US dollars, to transform Jakarta into a global city. Where they're going to get the money, we don't know. The Jakarta administration is currently designing a roadmap to transform the metropolis into a global city. The documents are expected to be completed this year. The roadmap will detail Jakarta's long-term development plans for the next 20 years. Now, Sri Haryati is the Assistant for Economics and Finance Regional Secretariat at the Jakarta Provincial Government.
Kita punya visinya itu Jakarta.
We have a vision for Jakarta to be a global city that is progressive, competitive, and sustainable. The last point is important because we are talking about issues related to the environment, climate change, and so on. So, sustainability is something that Jakarta really cares about. We are concerned about how human resources in Jakarta are of good quality, productive, and prosperous. Jakarta's economy should not only thrive, but also be inclusive, globally competitive, and sustainable.
Lewa, I want to give you the last word in this episode today. Detractors, they say this city was built on broken dreams, that from the get-go it was a pointless vanity project. So for you personally, as an Indonesian, how important is it that this new capital city is seen to fruition? And what would it say to the world if it fails?
Yeah, some said it's a vanity project. The money should be spent to improve Jakarta's infrastructures. I was born and raised in Jakarta, and I have to say, despite all the traffic, it's one of the most exciting cities on earth. Because I've traveled to New York, I've traveled to London, I've traveled to many places. But I'm biased, right? But anyway, on the other hand, Nusantara is a vision. If you look at the promotional videos, oh my God, look at that. It's a futuristic city. You'll have, for example, electric vehicles and even flying taxis. So going back to Jakarta, there's a very good example as a Jakartan and Indonesian. I mean, we talk about MRT. It's almost like a miracle that finally that project started under Jokowi. Finally, Jakarta has MRT system. I think it is 40 years too late, but it's better late than never. There's also LRT. So I think Indonesia as a country can't afford to see this project fail, Nusantara project. Its reputation as a rising economic powerhouse will be at stake. So, but then again, it depends on the government. I guess my bet the project will continue, but at a slower pace. And they have to find foreign investors to keep the project going. I think as simple as that.
Lewa, Saiful, we're a month out from the opening of Nusantara. I know you're both going to be very busy producing, reporting stories leading up to and after that day. Thank you so much for coming on today.
Thank you, Teresa, for having me.
Thank you, Teresa.
And follow Saiful and Lewa's reports on TV and online. Just head to YouTube, also CNA.Asia. And a reminder that the TV episodes of CNA Correspondent air every Wednesday at 9:30 p.m. Singapore, Hong Kong time. The team behind this week's episode is Saya Win, Clara Ong, Crispina Robert, Craig Dale, and myself, Teresa Tang. Thanks for joining us today.